Okay, so, all right, so let's go proceed. So without further ado, I will introduce Alan. Alan, you can tell them a little bit more about yourself.
So, hello folks, hope you can hear me. And I'm Alan Hoffman, I'm with Deque Systems. I'm actually a principal accessibility strategist with Deque Systems. And a little about myself is, well, I'm 55. If folks can mute their microphones, that would be good. I'm married with 3 children. I have been a programmer, an internet business owner, and a United States federal government employee for almost 30 years. And now I'm back in the commercial world with Deque Systems. I'm blind. I use a screen reader. I use Braille. I use a cane to get around. I think that's the really high level. Hold on just one second, and I will jump to my next slide.
Accessibility matters. Only. Slide 7. Slide view. Slide 11. Slide 12. Slide 14. Text placeholder rectangle. Digital accessibility refers to the practice of building digital.
So if we're on slide 14, Sean, it's what is digital accessibility? And it's a pretty simple thing. It's creating digital content which is usable by people with disabilities who usually use assistive technology. I'm paraphrasing the slide, but that's generally what it means. But that digital content can be web pages, it can be web applications, it could be mobile apps, it could be electronic documents. So Google Docs, Microsoft Office, these slides you're seeing now, all of that is digital content that you can make accessible for people with disabilities who may or may not be using assistive technologies.
Slide 15. Why accessibility?
Let's go to the next slide, Sean.
Text placeholder rectangle. People with disabilities should have equal access. It's simply the right thing to do.
So why is that? Why does this matter, or why is it important? As Sean said, it's a fundamental human right. Access to information is a key thing for education, employment, entertainment, and almost aspects of life, even just simple things like shopping, paying your bills, getting a doctor's appointment. Access to information is becoming pretty much indispensable, and because of that, it's basic to people's fundamental well-being, including people with disabilities. And I've got a couple other comments that I put in for this slide, Sean. So the United Nations Civil Rights for People with Persons with Disabilities is a UN treaty which is signed by pretty much all the member states, almost all anyway. And it sets out a fairly important set of human rights related to people with disabilities. And part of that is access to information, employment, and education, and things like that. And as it says on the slide here, it's just the right thing to do. Why would you not provide accessibility to, worldwide, it's 1 billion people that have one form of a disability or another. And so providing content and information which is inaccessible, you're cutting out something on the order of 20% of the people who need to work and use your information. And that's a pretty significant set of your total population. And if you want to take this just to a selfish level, almost all of us are going to have a disability at some point in our life, whether it's temporary or permanent. As we age, we all find one form of disability or another. Just kind of how it is.
Slide 16. How people with disabilities use the web.
So let's go to slide 16. So how do people with disabilities use the web? And I'm going to be paraphrasing some of this so I don't have to read and talk at the same time. So I'm blind, and I use software which runs on my laptop, which reads screen. I can sort of tell it what I need it to read. As I move around the screen, it reads the screen, so it can read these slides, for example. It'll read the title, and then it'll read the bullets. And at the same time, I'm using my mobile phone to use the Zoom app to be able to mute and unmute my mic or leave and enter this meeting or even join the meeting. And so right now I'm using two different assist technologies, one to use the web, the other to use an app. And people that have limited vision, they have applications that will make the screen larger, but then change the colors that are on the screen because some people have difficulty seeing some colors. Who can't type with their hands or use a mouse, they can use speech input. There's a well-known program called Drag and Dictate. Windows 10 has speech input built into it. So does Microsoft Office. iPhones and Android phones have speech input in most places in them these days. And that's just one example of how somebody who can't use their hands to type or run the computer can operate the computer. Then you have people who have no hearing or limited hearing. When they're watching media on the computer, and it needs options so that they can understand the words that are being spoken. Or if there's audio prompts on the computer or the mobile phone, then there are visual alternatives for them. So people who are deaf or have limited hearing also, some things on the new technology they really love. Like they love, like on their iPhone, they love FaceTime, or like Zoom, they can do sign language back and forth on the phone, which for sign language users is way faster than texting. Trying to think who I left out. People with cognitive disabilities. So that could be people who have trouble remembering things, have trouble processing text, so dyslexia. Some people have trouble processing numbers. Some people have attention deficit issues. And so there's a lot of access to the internet or the web or content which can just make the information almost unusable for them. So for example, if you have a web page that has a lot of moving and or blinking content on it, some people just simply cannot process all that at once. And if you have the wrong kind of flashing or blinking content, you can actually cause some people to have a seizure, which could actually be very damaging to them. And so there are things we can do to maximize how many people can use the information and the content we put on the web. We won't be going through all those today. This is just kind of an introduction. But because of those reasons, that's why, making the information accessible is so critical. The reality is there's so many things we can do that make information unusable for a significant portion of our audience, that it's really important to learn how to think about those people, think about it as a people first sort of approach when you're making information and content to go out on the internet, or even if it's not on the internet, if it's just a standalone application. Let's go to slide 17. So I think I sort of already hit on 17 categories of disabilities. See if I missed any. If anybody has any questions, feel free to just jump in and ask. I have no problem with that. I already touched on slide 18 with types of assistive technology.
Slide 19. Types of assistive technology. Slide view. Slide 20.
19.
So many perspectives. Slide view.
So I want to come up on
Slide 20.
slide 20, Sean. So many terms and so many perspectives. So there's a lot of buzzwords around digital accessibility, which digital accessibility is one of them. So I want to go through a few of those so that if you hear them in the near term, some of them will make a little more sense as opposed to just sound like extra words. So the first one is just a simple one, accessibility. And accessibility really amounts to that somebody can use your information so they can perceive it, operate it, and understand it. Doesn't say that it's easy to use, doesn't say it's easy to operate. They can. It's sort of the baseline. And along with accessibility goes the word compliance. There are a set of accessibility standards and guidelines out there in the world, with the most major one being the World Wide Web Consortium Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Those guidelines, if you meet them, you're going to be pretty accessible. However, you can meet those guidelines and still have products which are not really very usable. You can make things, or you can understand the material on the screen, but it takes you might take a long time, or it may be very inconvenient to use for numerous reasons. So accessibility and compliance are sort of the lowest common denominator. There's a lot of emphasis of late in pushing to be way past that, to inclusive design and inclusion, which I'm coming to next, as well as diversity and user experience. But I will say that the accessibility guidelines that are in the world today do an awful lot if people follow them. So I don't discount them as much as some folks in the business do. Getting something that's pretty darn good and get a lot of that done is maybe better than only having one thing that's really great and 12 that are very bad. So I'll go on to inclusion. Inclusion really relates to people first. And, for example, if you're a business that you hire people with disabilities or hire people with a whole range of abilities and disabilities, and then when you do hire them, make sure that you provide them opportunities to advance, make sure you provide them the tools they need to do their jobs. If there's training that you provide, make sure that's accessible so they can, learn the material. And designing, if you have information or products, then design them with people with disabilities in mind, and maybe bring them in to have them pilot your product, take their information into account up front. The phrase out there in the disability community is "nothing about us without us." So that's sort of the topic of inclusion and inclusive design, is bring people with disabilities in through that whole design and development process and get their feedback as you go along, and you'll probably have a lot less problems at the end of the road. And then you get to diversity, and diversity is a lot like inclusion. It really focuses on a lot of the who do you have in your user base, who do you have in your employees, who do you have supporting your educational activities, and really it comes down to try to get a good the widest amount of types of people with different abilities, disabilities, people with different ethnic backgrounds, racial backgrounds, countries of origin, bring them all into to your organization and treat them well. and it will improve your overall product and your profit margin if you're in the commercial space. So it's a little different than accessibility, compliance, or inclusive design, and it's a little more wide scoped.